Here's our host, Chris Pierce.
Hey, good morning. Welcome back to Viewpoint Television. I'm your host, Chris Pierce. And with Election Day less than 48 hours away, that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about some of the hottest races in Douglas County and around the state. To help me out with that, I've got two great political analysts with us today. First, Nebraska Watchdog's Joe Jordan and PoliticalInsidersReport.com, Chris Scott. Guys, I want to thank you both for coming in. We've got a lot to talk about today. But we're going to start with the easy ones. Let's talk about some state ledge races. Chris, one of the hottest races and the only defending state senator that we've got, and that's Burke Harr against Gwenn Aspen. Where do you see that race?
It's going to be extremely tight. Joe's group just wrote a great piece on how much money's been spent on it, but I got to figure that's the only incumbent seat that they're holding on to. There's going to be a lot more money, I would imagine, at the end of it, but it's being very tight. It's tough to call.
Joe?
I think it's neck and neck. You look at the spending, and right now, Burke Harr has already spent about $200,000 to keep that seat. Gwenn Aspen has spent about $100,000. There's an outside group that's against her, another $16,000, and money's still coming in as we go down to the wire here. There's a good chance that race will spend more than $400,000.
And the interesting is where those donors are from, because you see a distinct difference. I think you even mentioned it in your piece about where Harr seems to be more organizational money, where Aspen seems to be some big political names, but a lot more in individuals. Do you think that's going to affect the way people look at this race?
No, I don't think when the voters go in, they really know who's paid for what. I think overall, it's those legislative races, they're like neighborhood races. Mm-hmm. That's basically a Dundee race in many respects. It goes beyond the Dundee neighborhood, but for the most part, if you travel that area, drive through, that's where you see all the yard signs. They're all over Dundee, and Harr, he's the incumbent. Always tough to take out an incumbent. Gwenn Aspen, as we know, the wife of Jeremy Aspen, mm-hmm. who was involved heavily in the attempted recall of Jim Suttle. So there's a lot of politics in those two names right there.
Now, Chris, let me ask you about that race because it is close. Is it closer than you thought because of the incumbency?
No, actually, I think she won by about 90 votes in the primary. But I genuinely think she's a little bit more dynamic than Burke, and a lot of this is door to door. But are you going to associate her win with her, or more at the high Republican turnout because of the really high profile primaries? I don't think anybody, at least from the right, thought that she would even win the primary. We thought maybe it would be within, it would be a reasonable fight, but you can certainly tell that they're after, if you look at the early ballot numbers for that particular race, I mean, at one time she was down, if you just assume that Democrats go to Democrats and Republicans go to Republicans, in the general, she was down by about 1,000 at one time, and that's a significant difference to make up. So I don't think Democrats are taking that seat for granted. I think it's going to be a tough fight for her.
If I could just butt in, yeah, I do think that turnout in the primary was distorted, because I do think when you looked at the governor's race and the Senate race and the House race in Omaha, and those were three heavily featured Republican races, and the Democrats really didn't have any reason to show up at the polls in the spring, and I do think those numbers are distorted. Now, having said that, could Gwenn Aspen win on Tuesday? Absolutely. Okay.
Do you since she only won by 90, did you expect a bigger skew in her favor because of that?
I actually think those numbers don't really tell us anything.
Okay.
I think it's an outlier, and what we're going to find out is on Tuesday where the strengths really are.
All right, Joe. Let's stay with the legislature. Let's look at Legislative District 6, Joni Craighead and Stalnaker. That's another tight race. A lot of money involved, but you don't hear a whole lot about that race.
Well, I think it's because you've got two non-income. It's an open seat because Senator Nelson became lieutenant governor, and he was term limited regardless. Mm-hmm. But I think because you've got two names that aren't on the top of people's tongues, that's why I think that race has sort of been in the background a little bit as compared to District 8 and the Harr-Aspen race.
Well, and another thing about 6 specifically is that, I think Joni won, it was 26, the next person was 23, but if you put together the other candidates on the Democrat side, I mean, it's conceivable that Joni doesn't win that seat. It's going to be another very, very tight race, but it's just not a high-profile race because I think Burke is the incumbent defending it, so most of the focus money and in time has been on 8.
Well, and the interesting thing about that race, if Joni Craighead wins that race, she could be seated as the state senator prior to taking office in January because the governor has yet to appoint the state senator to replace John Nelson.
Yeah, and I think that was the right thing to do. There was no special session that was coming up on anything, and there was no reason to give anybody an initial edge in going into this thing. I think let the voters decide who they want to be there.
All right, the last one we talked about a little before we got on the show, I thought was a little tighter race. That's LD20 between Matt Lathrop and John McCollister, and the reason why I thought it'd be a little tighter is because of the name ID with the Lathrop.
Well, I think McCollister has a fair, you always hear numbers, but at the end of the day, we're not going to know till Tuesday. But I think McCollister has a fairly, pretty decent name recognition as well. Lathrop, I don't think people are necessarily going to equate his brother's time, maybe with this legislative session now, but McCollister's father was a congressman. I think he has a significant amount of name recognition as well.
Yeah,
Joe?
I'd give the name recognition edge to Mr. McCollister.
Really? Okay.
Because of the John Y. lineage and the history of Congress and what have you. The Lathrop name carries a lot of weight, but if you think about it, Steve was over there in the Ralston Millard area where he represented his constituents. This is back in the city, as it were, and Mr. Lathrop, the candidate in 20, I think he's got his work cut out for him. But these legislative races are so hard to judge sometimes. They're almost like they're actually below the radar of city council races in Omaha. In Lincoln, it's just the opposite. People know who their state senator is. They don't know who their councilman is. Here, it's just the opposite. They know who their councilman is. They're trying to figure out half the time who their state senator is.
Now, there's been a lot of third-party money in a lot of these legislative races, as Joe, as you mentioned. NSCA has been a big part of that, so has some of the other groups. How much does that play into the real politics when it comes to money? Is that really making a difference as third-party money in these races?
I think it depends on the message. If you're doing something very hard-hitting and it's believable, I think you'd make a difference. I mean, if you have, in some of these races, you have quite a bit of undecided. So I think a decent amount of money. Now, you might lose a little credibility because it's from Citizens for Better Tomorrow and people don't really know what that organization is. But if it's hard-hitting and it's reasonably factual, it can make a difference.
Joe?
Well, I think people, I think when they look at these political campaigns, especially given, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit later, they look at TV commercials and somewhat the radio commercials. What I think they miss in some of these legislative races, it's all happening in your mailbox. And those flyers are coming in, those mail pieces are coming in, some are positive, a lot of them are negative, and they can really heat things up. And I do think overall, that's where the money plays out in those legislative races. So if the NSCA is involved, and they're contributing to a candidate, that candidate's looking at that money to be able to use to fund those mail pieces.
And speaking about, I could tell you for my wife and I, we early vote, we always do. The day my ballot came, I had 27 pieces of mail, 27. And one candidate, I had 4 pieces. So they must have lots of money just to burn through if they can send me 4 pieces. Well, one to me and one to my wife. So.
But that goes back to one of Joe's articles before, is there's so many people now voting early. A significant amount of the people are voting early, whether it be in person or absentee. I mean, that trend has just grown considerably. So that's why you're getting these chase mail pieces, because no one's going to concede that vote. They know that you're probably going to vote. Okay.
Before we go on to the big races, I want to talk about the PSC race between John Seiler and Crystal Rhodes. A lot of people thought that they thought the Democratic primary was going to be a big deal. I don't think it was. I think she solidly won that race. But that district is a Democratic district. Does John Seiler really have a chance in that? And given that he's a sitting state board of education, could have ran for re-election. Now Pat McPherson's running that race. I just understand why he got in the race, given the district that he's running for, and she's a candidate.
Well, I haven't talked to him, but he might have gotten in the race because he's got a nice paycheck that goes with that position.
Which is?
I think it was $75,000 a year for the Public Service Commission. That alone is somewhat of an incentive, and it's a 6-year job. So if you get it, it's like United States Senator. You're there for 6 years. So it's very appetizing when you're looking at it. I do agree with you that the district lays out for the Democrat, and in Crystal Rhodes' case, she early had the support of Ann Boyle, who on the commission, carries a lot of weight right now in that district, so she's going to be, Crystal Rhodes will be tough.
And I thought it was very interesting, Chris, that first it was Crystal Rhodes, then it was Jim Esch, and then John Green got into the race. which really puzzled not only some of us on the sideline, but a lot of Democrats were kind of couldn't understand what that was about. Any ideas?
I actually thought Jim Esch would win that, but to Joe's point, I mean, he's got an uphill battle. John Sealer is not raising the money that Crystal Rhodes is raising, and if you're that far down the ballot, you got to have a presence, and I think she's gonna be real tough to beat.
All right, before we go to the break, I'm going to cover one of the big races, which I don't really think is that big of a race. That's Sasse and Domina. I think Sasse has got this wrapped up. That's why he's not had to. He said, I'm not going to do any debates. Why give my opponent an opportunity for me to make a gaffe, and then I end up losing the race, which we've seen across the country. I mean, Joe, do you agree with that?
I mean, it's been a pure Rose Garden strategy. Politically, I don't think you can find any fault with the way Ben Sasse has run that campaign. Now, philosophically, you can make the argument that, where have the debates been? One was held, I mean, Mr. Sasse has made the case that there's been 4 debates. I think one was in June, there was one maybe in August, there was the state fair debate, and I think one maybe in mid-September. But all those debates were held long before a lot of the voters were even starting to tune into that race. They sort of shut the door on Mr. Domina, and there are, I think the CBS News, New York Times poll had Domina down by some 25 points.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be close. I think I've not seen a primary run that brilliantly. To go from 7% name recognition to, I mean, winning by as much as he did and pushing Shane Osborne into 3rd place, and he's continuing that strategy. I mean, he has nothing to gain from debating. So you could argue philosophically, but from a strategic standpoint, I mean, it's not close. Why would you do it?
But let me ask this point to you, Chris. Philosophically, he should be out there talking about the issues. Because he refuses to do that, or his strategy is, why put my stuff out there, doesn't that do a disservice to the voters who are trying to learn? Really, do the voters right now have an idea where Ben Sasse stands on much of anything because he's not been out there?
Well, I think they're going to find out he's going to mail it in and do it through TV and perhaps radio and mail, and you'll get the Ben Sasse that they want you to see. But that's the nature of
and Joe, he's got some new commercials out.
Well, but most of the commercials are pretty pictures, to be honest with you.
Yes, you're exactly right.
And I mean, if voters, I think, know anything about Ben Sasse, they know he can't stand "quote-unquote" Obamacare. I mean, that's how he got to the primary. That was the message he brought then. That's the message he's bringing now.
Okay, so when we come back, guys, we're going to get into some of the other bigger races. We're also going to talk about the minimum wage, and we're going to, of course, talk about some of the advertising and some of the political ads we've been seeing. We'll be right back.
Selling cookies is about
the big picture. You have to have a goal. A big goal.
something you and your team
Want to do in the world. We choose where the money goes. A trip. An adventure. Helping people out.
helping a lot of people out.
And about the money.
We are responsible for it.
Handling it, managing it,
Tracking it. Doing great things with it.
This is business.
girl business.
The biggest girl-run business
In the world.
Did you think this was just about cookies?
Welcome back to Viewpoint. We're speaking with our guests, Joe Jordan and Chris Scott, talk about the election, which is just 48 hours away, and we're going to get into the 2nd congressional race, gentlemen. What a race. Mudslinging is keeping it clean, in my opinion, but let's just talk about the beginning. I think no one saw Brad Ashford coming. I don't think, if you were to think 18, almost 2 years ago, when people started thinking about running for office, I don't think Brad Ashford came to the tip of the tongue. What I was always hearing was Brad wanted to run for Senate, not necessarily for Congress. Does he got it? Can he pull this off?
Oh, this is a pure jump ball right now. Yeah, I mean, it could go either way. I think there's a bit of momentum maybe that has gone to the Democrats if we go down the stretch here, but the key on Tuesday for the Democrats right now is the turnout. Can they get enough of that off-year vote? Because in a non-presidential year, president's not on the ballot, that's where we are. The Democratic vote in Douglas County and the 2nd Congressional District drops about 30%. Up in Ward 2, where you've got voters who almost 9 out of 10 will vote for the Democratic candidate, they'll see a 50% drop off in that normal year. So can the Democrats change that, maybe by 10 or 15 points, increase that voter turnout? If they can do that, then I think Ashford makes it across the finish line. Turnout is going to be critical. And then and just sort of laying the background is that Sarpy County situation, because that has always been Lee Terry's firewall. Ashford, early on, went after some of the veteran vote, pushed that. Terry fought back. They kind of sparred on that. And it'll be curious to see how Sarpy County weighs out in this thing.
Chris, can Terry come back? In 2012, he lost by 1.6 points against John Ewing. Does he have it to come back and pull this one out one more time?
I just think that, first off, I'd say he dodged a bullet in the fact that Festerson didn't get in the race. And because I don't think it would be that close.
Why do you think Festerson didn't?
Because I think he's a much better candidate. I don't think Ashford's necessarily a great candidate. I personally believe it's more of a referendum on Lee Terry and self-inflicted gunshot wounds. And Festerson would have, I felt, probably run a much better campaign, and it wouldn't be that close. So with that being said, I don't think, I never thought Ashford would be really close to this, but Lee Terry just had a tendency to do things that are just, I personally believe, somewhat politically suicidal.
And you talk about referendum because, he's the gaffe king in some respects. But, you talk about a referendum. He narrowly escaped a primary challenge by Dan Fry, who, interestingly enough, just this weekend put his support behind Lee Terry. Some people say he had his nose pinched. Some people say it may be a little too late. What do you think? Can that support bring those that we're Republicans, we're conservatives, we just can't stand Lee Terry, but we'd rather do that than have Brad Ashford?
I think most Republicans would probably concede that even though they might not perhaps like Lee Terry, more Dan Fry fans, they'll probably hold their nose. But again, it goes back to Joe's point. It's going to be all about turnout. It's going to be all about what happens in Sarpy, which, to Joe's point, it's always saved Lee Terry, is that Sarpy vote. So it's going to be a turnout game. But
the interesting thing about that, though, Joe, is I don't think that was a smart move, because the switch from Sarpy County, the second district lost the base, lost Bellevue, got Gretna. So I don't see how the veteran message played as well as I think they think it should have.
Well, you don't have the base anymore. That's now in Mr. Fortenberry's district. But you still have lots of people that live out in that Papillion area. Not quite sure it goes all the way over to Gretna because they want to be closer to the base. But then there's also these veterans who, they're no longer in active duty. But going back to the question of where the votes are coming from, this isn't just Lee Terry's problem this year. You go back 2 years ago, in the 2nd Congressional District, Mitt Romney got 7,000 more votes than Lee Terry did. Now, those are 7,000 Republican votes that Lee Terry should have had easy. They should have walked in the door and checked the Terry boxes. They checked the Romney box. They didn't. They were mad at him 2 years ago. A lot of those Republicans are still mad at him. I think Dan Fry pulled some of them in. How many? I don't know if it's enough. I do think it might be a little bit too late. But again, this, like I said earlier, this right now, it's a jump ball. It could go either way.
All right, Joe, let's start talking about some of the advertising, because really, the advertising has been around this race. It has to do with Jenkins. It has to in some ads linking ISIS to some of the problems and cutting funding now that Lee Terry created the Ebola problem. A lot to do about nothing, but there are a lot of scare tactics.
Well, I think this whole thing was encapsulated in a moment this last week when in court, as bizarre as it is, here is Nico Jenkins mouthing out, vote for Lee Terry. I mean, Nico Jenkins.
Does that save Terry?
I don't know. I don't know how it plays. But what it tells me is that everybody in this district knows what's going on. I mean, the voters, they either are buying the Nico Jenkins argument that Terry's campaign has made, or they're not. But everybody knows about it. There's no secrets here anymore. And I think initially when that ad came out, it was certainly a bump for the Terry campaign. It seemed like it caught the Democrats a little flat-footed. I think it took them like 4 or 5 days before they reacted. Their reaction wasn't that great. Then they got a real bonus. The Omaha World-Herald did the editorial, blasted Terry. Then the Democrats came back with that commercial saying the World-Herald says that Lee Terry's all wrong.
Omaha World-Herald did that 2 years ago when they blasted Lee Terry for some ads and then also endorsed John Ewing, but yet.
Well, Ewing still lost, but it was so close. I mean, all those things matter. I mean, if you go back over the last 6 or 7 years, except for 2010, you kind of throw that was out when Terry just clobbered Senator White. Yeah. That was the Obamacare year. Everything else it's been getting closer and closer and closer, and you have to wonder, is this finally the time when the Democrats push it across the finish line?
Well, and it's one interesting thing because Lee Terry was trying to make tremendous inroads into the Northeast community, which is predominantly African American, and he started, if you remember, in the beginning of the campaign with William King, who was an entrepreneur that had his own radio station.
A Democrat.
Yeah, and Lee Terry, was able to help them have a voice, and got from that all the way to Nico Jenkins. I mean, I think personally, he's probably killed a lot of that goodwill that he was hoping for when it comes to voting time.
Well, I don't know what that room looked like, but there had to be a moment when the Terry campaign got together and they said, how are we going to do this? I mean, we all know that Congressman Terry's negative is huge for a sitting incumbent. So they had to decide, are we going to play nice or are we going to play mean? And I think they decided to play hardball.
All right, Chris, you're going to have to handle this one, carry the water. For our viewers, Joe Jordan has consistently during this campaign decided not to participate in any conversation about the governor's race because Pete Ricketts was one of the original funders of the Watchdog program, and he's taken that stance. And on TV, I want to commend you because I think that's a stand-up thing to do, and I appreciate that. So that means you're on the hot seat. Let's talk about Hassebrook-Ricketts. Not a lot of nastiness, differencing on opinion on issues. Where do we see this coming?
I think one of the challenges Pete had coming in was softening that image. In 2006, I think Nelson did a pretty masterful job in defining and painting Ricketts as an out-of-touch individual. I think they've done a great job of kind of reshaping his image.
And I think where he started that, I think the very first thing he did, what I personally think was brilliant, was when he came in the primary and talked about, I'm the bald conservative. He decided to make fun of himself, humanized himself, brought him down a level, and I think that helped some of that inability to relate to the common guy.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge he's had is he connected to the voters. He's obviously done very well. His family's done very well. But that self-deprecation, I thought, helped to soften him up a little bit. And, I was pretty surprised. I mean, it was a real toss-up, Bruning not winning that primary between he and Bruning. And he won it, and he won it, 3 points. It was a good margin of victory in a contested primary. But the big thing now is, I don't really see Hassebrook having the money to compete with Ricketts.
But you've got Hassebrook, who's a Democrat who's not from Omaha and not from Lincoln. He's from rural Nebraska. He's got some of those rural agricultural roots from what he's done. He's been on the Board of Regents. Doesn't that get him a little something that many other candidates that the Democrats have had can't take advantage of?
I don't think he's a bad candidate. I think you're spot on with a lot of things. The ag obviously works for the Nebraska Rural Affairs. I don't necessarily think he's a bad candidate, but you need money to compete. And Pete Ricketts has had no problem raising money, and I think that there's going to be a slight, it was a smart, calculated move to really get involved in the minimum wage push. That was very smart on his part to do that, and I think that will, bring some voters out. But I don't think it's going to be enough.
Right. Good transition, Joe. Initiative 425, raising the minimum wage. First of all, I think we can all admit that was a great strategy on the Democrats to bring something to the table at a midterm election. Republicans have done it for decades to get out their own voters for statewide races. Is that what it's going to do? First of all, do you think it's going to pass?
Oh, I think it already has passed.
Yeah, and I think you're right too. But is that going to be the reason why maybe a Chuck Hassebrook, maybe a Brett Ashford can win?
I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt because it should increase the Democratic voter turnout. What's curious about that is if you notice, there's been no opposition, and I think there's no opposition because the decision was made. Let's be quiet about this. We'll shut up and take our lumps. Let the minimum wage go up, but we don't want a flurry of more voters coming to the polls if we make this thing a bigger deal.
Chris?
No, I think you're spot on. I think where it really impacts is you have a combination of 3 things. In the 2nd district, you have the OPS bond issue, you have 425, and the prospects of getting Lee Terry. I think in that race, that could be real impactful. I don't necessarily think it affects Sass and Domina and Hassebrook and Ricketts that much, but it's certainly in the 2nd district.
All right, quick question, last question. Best ran race this cycle?
Ben Sass.
Yeah, without a doubt.
I disagree. It was Diane Badiotto running for assessor versus your needs. We'll be right back in just a moment.
Listen, I think it's time we had that talk. Now, I can tell that you really like this girl, but I think you kids move way too fast. I just need to know that you're using protection.
Dad.
So buckle up, son. And no sex!
All right, this week we've got a special treat for you. It's a new segment that we're doing called The Inside View. It's where we take a look at local entrepreneurs and small business owners, and let's profile their businesses and some of the impacts they have on our community. This week, for our first Inside View, we have Bulldog Burgers, a customized burger joint that I think hits the spot. Let's take a look. I'm always looking for a great burger, and I may have found a contender. Man, this is good. What's in this?
We use fresh Wagyu beef for our burgers here. A lot of people make a misconception, what is Wagyu? Kobe. Kobe is a city in Japan. People say Kobe beef, that's like saying Chicago-style pizza. Kobe is the city, the actual breed of cattle is Wagyu, which is Japanese for cattle.
So your family's hanging house is the one that makes these burgers for you, huh?
They actually process the cattle, correct. They harvest and fabricate the cattle. Any toppings you want. We carry everything from peanut butter and pineapples to chorizo and sunny-side-up fried eggs, a multitude of sauces, cheeses. We have our own opinion of what good house burgers are, but we don't know everything. We let the customer tell us what sounds good on a burger.
So you've got the make your own menu, but do you have a standard menu as well?
We do. We feature a house option of burgers where you can get anything you want, from a breakfast burger with the fried egg and chorizo to the garden bulldog burger with all the vegetables and sauces. We feature plenty of customer creation burgers where customers have come in and out, built their own burgers. They're regulars. They love coming in here. We actually had a customer come in, ask for peanut butter and jelly on a burger. Said, I'm sorry, we don't carry jelly. Walked out, got in his car, drove to Hy-Vee, picked up grape jelly, brought it back here, said, hey, I want grape jelly and peanut butter on a burger.
So what do you guys think?
Very good.
It's very good?
Yeah.
What do you think?
It's really good.
Really good? Mm-hmm. Bring your own pet photo, add it to the Pet Wall of Fame, and you get a free dessert. And yes, there really is a bulldog. His name is Turk. With his family connection to a South Omaha meatpacking business, Chuck is convinced he's found a niche for high-quality custom burgers. Bulldog Burgers is open Monday through Saturday from 11 to 9. 11811 4th Street, just off the corner of 120th and 4th, right here in Omaha. Now, I don't know if you guys noticed, but I really did enjoy that burger there at Bulldog Burgers. Well, that's our show for this week. I want to thank our two guests, Chris Scott with PoliticalInsidersReport.com and our friend Joe Jordan with the Nebraska Watchdog. I hope to see you guys next week. Same time, same channel. And remember, everyone has a point of view. Respect it.